Today, I want to talk about exercise and some of the problems that I have when it comes to exercise. I've done a lot of, um, reflecting back on my life when it comes to me and my exercise ability and my desire to exercise. And my childhood, I was not an overweight child. I was a normal sized child and I was extremely active, and I was a really fast runner when I was in elementary school and loved racing with the other kids during recess, and um, just a normal kid. So I was born in the late 60s, grew up, was in elementary school in the 70s, and so we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have so many of the things that kids have nowadays, the distractions. I had a television that had the little dial on it. There was no remote controls, and there was very limited programming for kids. So we went out, we played, and we were very active as kids. So most kids were not overweight. Very, very, very rarely was there a child that was overweight. So I had issues, began to have issues in with exercise when I got into junior high, and it was in the early 80s, and the aerobic fad started. The trend for doing aerobics had started, and my mother would make these comments about people who purposefully exercised. She would call them exercise nuts, and I didn't realize that that had a big impression on me. I mean, my parents were in their early 40s when they had me. I have two much older siblings. My sister, who's the oldest, is 20 years older than me, and my brother is 16 years older than me. And so I came along, I was a big surprise. But my parents they grew up in the Depression era. They're both since deceased. They have passed away several years ago. But they grew up in the Depression era. And so they had a very, very different way of thinking, a different mentality. And they grew up in a time of scarcity. Their whole lives, they never had weight problems till my mom was really old and just couldn't be very mobile. But my mom was incredibly active, and she was I refer to her to as like June Cleaver. For those of you who know Leave It to Beaver and June Cleaver and that 1950s housewife that she gets, dressed every morning and does her makeup and her hair and puts on house dresses, and she cleaned our whole house every single day. And she was on her hands and knees cleaning our floors, and she cleaned all the toilets. She cleaned everything, the toilets, she dusted, she vacuumed. That was my mom, and she prepared 3 meals a day. She was an amazing mother, and I absolutely adored her, but she was incredibly active, and she didn't realize, I think, that what she was doing was exercise. So when the early 80s hit and everybody was doing aerobics or going out and doing jogging and purposeful exercise, she just thought that was so weird. Like, why would people do that? And so this whole thing about calling them exercise nuts got ingrained into my mind. So much so, actually, I think it was sixth grade, because I, in sixth grade, got in trouble with my PE teacher. And my mom got called in after school to have a meeting with me and my PE teacher, because we were doing some indoor calisthenics, floor exercises, and I was exasperated with them, probably because of the impression I got from my mom. And I called my teacher an exercise nut. She didn't appreciate that. So, anyways, had to have a meeting with my teacher and my mom. And, my teacher told my mom what I said. And my mom told me, don't do that. You need to follow, do what your teacher says and do the exercises. And so that was kind of my life. When I was a freshman in high school, during our PE class, we had to run the mile around the track. And of course, I had stopped running after fifth grade. So I had tried to run the mile. I took one trip around the track, and looking back, I believe I had an asthma attack. I know that I couldn't breathe and my lungs just burned. And I sat down on the ground on the track, and my PE teacher came over. Now, this is a different PE teacher, freshman year of high school, but came over and she asked me, "Are you okay?" And I told her what was going on. And so she said, and she stayed with me until I recovered and said, "Okay, you can just walk the rest of the way." And it was just a different era back then, because nowadays I think the teacher would have called my mom, but that didn't happen. And I never said anything. But it's weird because kids are a little different now. They're very much more vocal. I kind of came from the kids are to be seen and not heard era. I think more so because of my parents' old, they're from an older generation. And so if I had something like that happen, I just said, "Oh, well, it happened. It's over." So I didn't say a word to my mom. And so nowadays, I would have been going to the doctor, probably getting diagnosed with exercise induced asthma and getting an inhaler so that I could take an inhaler before I exercised. That did not happen. What did happen was I was terrified to exert myself after that. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to. I actually became afraid of breathing heavy for fear that that would happen again. I empathize with people who have regular asthma or exercise induced asthma, and they're not, this happens to them, because it's terrifying to not be able to breathe. So I did not address it. I was just that era, you don't say anything, at least the way I was raised. And so I just didn't want to run and didn't want to exercise for fear of that happening again. I started to gain weight in 6th grade, but that was normal, pre-puberty weight. I mean, by the end of 5th grade, I'd had a major growth spurt. I was like 5'4". I weighed 112 pounds. So I was a beanpole. And then a year later, in the end of 6th grade at school, they used to weigh us and measure us. I was about 5'6", and I had gained 30 pounds. I had about 142 pounds. So I'd gained 30 pounds over that year. A lot of that, and it was puberty. I mean, I'm sure it was part of it. Part of it was puberty. Another part of it was just being more sedentary. Something really significant happened during my 5th grade year. My grandmother had lived with us since I was born, and she was, basically my best friend. And I used to come home from school every day and spend time with her, and we'd play games, and I'd spend until dinner. I'd be spending a lot of time with my grandmother. And one day, it was a beautiful day, my friend came over, she wanted to play. I was 10, and I didn't even stop in to see my grandmother after school. I just went out to play with my friend and then came in for dinner. And my mom said, "Lynn, could you go get grandma for dinner?" And so she had the bedroom next to mine. So I ran down the hall and I burst in there going, "Grandma, it's time to eat." And she was laying on the floor unconscious. And I screamed and I ran back out crying to my parents. And I'm going to get choked up. But anyways, I came back, ran crying, and my parents came running, and they called 911. And I was so afraid. And I remember waiting outside for the ambulance, and I saw them take my grandmother away, and she was hooked up to oxygen, and probably had an IV for all I know. I don't remember. All I remember is that my grandma I didn't know she was alive. 3 days later, she died. She had had a massive stroke. She was 78, and I blamed myself. I was only 10, and in my little 10-year-old mind, I thought it was my fault that she died. Not that she had the stroke, but I thought it was my fault that she died because I wasn't with her, and I usually was with her. It still gets me to this day. I didn't plan on crying. But again, because I was raised in this household where you don't really talk about your feelings. You talk about other things, but you don't talk about the difficult things and the important conversations, I just felt like I had to be strong, and I didn't cry. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't see my parents, my mom crying. This is my mother's mom. I didn't ever see her cry. And nobody asked me how I was doing, because here I was 10 years old. I was the one that discovered her. And looking back, I could see, wow, that was traumatic, for a 10-year-old child. And I know there's so many kids that go through a lot worse than that, but I'm one of those very, very sensitive people. I'm probably an empath, and because I feel very deeply and I feel what other people feel, and it makes me cry all the time. And but no one ever asked me how I was doing. No one ever told me it was okay to cry. No one ever found out and knew that I blamed myself. And so that summer after fifth grade, I was different. In fact, from that point on, I'm later on in my life, I talked to my parents, and they told me, yeah, you changed then. I was more solemn. I remember when I was out of school that summer, instead of being really active with my friends, I did a lot of introspective things. I would write, I would draw, and I wasn't nearly as active. So I'm assuming that also contributed to the weight gain, because my lifestyle changed, and my internal emotional, experience changed. I went from being happy-go-lucky, not a care in the world, really happy childhood, to carrying this burden that if I had been there when my grandmother had her stroke, maybe she wouldn't have died. That maybe that we would have gotten her help right away, and she may have survived. It took me years. It took me years to realize that the outcome probably would have been the same. She had a massive stroke, and I don't think there's anything that I could have done about it to save her life, even if we had gotten there earlier. The doctor said it was a massive stroke. So, but it was years, and it was probably 2 decades at least. Yeah, at least 2 decades before I finally talked to my parents and shared with them how I felt, and they told me that they saw a difference in me. So I think this was the first big event in my life that started to contribute to weight loss. And then along with my impression of exercise, it definitely didn't help. It was around that time, and maybe it's because I was spending so much time at home talking to my mom more about other things, that I picked up on the fact that my mom had this issue with exercise, even until the point where she was, when she was in her later years, she developed Alzheimer's, and she was in a care facility and in assisted living for a while. We would always try to encourage her to go to the exercise classes and get some movement. And she would just look at us and go, I don't exercise. And she was just feisty. She was really feisty as she got older. And when she had Alzheimer's, she was not a sweet Alzheimer old lady. She could be a little bit mean. So, but that still came out in her to the very end. She would say, I don't exercise. So that's what I grew up with. Those are the influences that I grew up with. Now, there are a ton of other things that happened that influenced me and why I gained weight over the years. I had other things that happened to me as a teenager, in my 20s, my 30s. I mean, just a lot. I'm not going to go into it on this video. If you want to hear more, it'll probably be healthy for me to record more. But I'm going to keep this one. It's already long, so I'm going to keep this one shorter. Don't want to go over 20 minutes. But I wanted to actually, share this and record this and do some reflection on why I don't exercise, why I struggle with exercise. I do have an inhaler now So I could use it before I exercise. But I have these, it's all in here. It's all in my head. It's all, the problem is from the neck up in my thinking. And I've got to be somehow overcome the early childhood messages that I got about exercise. I'm trying to encourage my kids to not carry on that tradition. My son, no problem. He's a bodybuilder. He is the most dedicated, disciplined person I have ever seen. This kid weighs every item of every meal. He is working out on a schedule. There is nothing that's going to get in his way. He's a competitive bodybuilder, and he's got like maybe 4% body fat. And he's extremely muscular, 6'4". He's just like, fit like you wouldn't believe. So I'm not worried about my son. My daughters, not so much. They are more like me. My youngest daughter is more motivated now because she's getting married. She's been going out to the gym, but I've been encouraging her, like, look, don't carry on the tradition that I modeled for you. I was not a good example of how to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So I'm really encouraging her, get out there, get to the gym, exercise with your fiance, make it a part of your lives. Go out and, walk. And they've been going out when the weather's nice, taking long walks and getting some exercise. And he's lost like 50 pounds lately, this year so far. And she's starting to lose weight. So I'm really proud of them. And I hope that they can continue it. I'm really encouraging her. Like, this is something you need to teach your children, to incorporate exercise into their lives and a healthy lifestyle, and not carry on the bad messaging that I received as a child. So I really hope that she can break that cycle of, bad feelings and bad emotions around the idea of exercise. So anyways, I feel sad that I cried, but I'm kind of not surprised. Whenever I talk about my grandmother, I loved her so much, and it gets to me. She was the only grandmother I had because both of my parents were so much older than me, or so much older, sorry, so much older. Two of my grandparents died while my mom was pregnant with me, and my dad's father, he never knew. So she was the only grandparent I ever had, and I lost her at age 10 and under such traumatic circumstances. So it does make me cry, I think for different reasons now, but I think it's good considering I didn't cry back then. I can cry, and I still feel, I think when you deal with trauma as a child, often when you start talking about it, it kind of takes you right back there emotionally. And I think that's what happens when I talk about my grandmother. But she was an absolutely wonderful lady, and I look forward to seeing her someday in heaven. Okay, that's it for today. And if you're still here with me after almost 20 minutes, thank you so much for listening. And this YouTube channel, I think, is going to be a blessing. Whether I get a zillion subscribers or the subscribers I have now, I'm just so blessed, and it's been a positive thing in my life. So I thank you all, and I appreciate all of your comments. Bye-bye.